It's time for another podcast by George. Straight talk, straight from the heartland, that'll have you saying, "By George, I think he's got it." Now, here's George.
Hello, hi, how are you? And welcome back into another podcast by George. We're sheltering at home. We're self-quarantining, as they say. It's kind of isolating, but it does allow me to get back on with the podcast a little more often, and it allows me to reach folks that are in the same circumstance. And that's the case today. We've got Jackie Kale on the phone with us, and I wanted to kind of start this off by explaining something. I do this podcast by George, which is all about me and everything that I'm about and interested in. And you see it all the time on the World Wide Web, on all the various platforms. But once a week, I do a custom podcast, audio-only podcast for Above and Beyond Cancer. Now, this is an organization that's really great. Its founder, Dr. Richard Deming, realizes and understands profoundly that if people just sit and wither after their cancer diagnosis, they're much more likely to not do well, let's say. So he wants to have people moving about if they possibly can. They want to engage their bodies and minds and get them back in the business of living, really, which is what aboveandbeyondcancer.org is. And you can check their podcasts out that I just produced. I did a little intro, but it's all about the doctor and his guests that are on that podcast, and they're at aboveandbeyondcancer.org. All right, well, so that's a little foundation, a little starter for where we're at, because everybody's following the news with the coronavirus, and what else is there to do? But they keep telling us over and over that, you know, the people that are most at risk are those at-risk groups that we always hear about, the elderly, people that have weakened immune systems, people that have underlying medical issues. And so I'm watching this, and it's kind of like a train going by, but all of a sudden I thought to myself, wait a minute, I'm doing these cancer podcasts. Those folks that I go to those meetings with, those cancer survivors, what about them? They seem to be, the most at risk, and particularly if you're a current diagnosis, if you're currently undergoing treatment. So anyway, I thought I got to get a hold of somebody, and so that's why Jackie's on the podcast with us. Jackie Kale is the grassroots manager for American Cancer Society and the Cancer Action Network. Jackie, thanks for coming on, and welcome to a podcast by George.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here and kind of talk about everything that's going on. COVID-19 has definitely put a wrench, I think, in everyone's plans these past next few months. We're going to be dealing with this, specifically cancer patients. We want to make sure that those who are most vulnerable are protected.
Well, that's really what I got to thinking about, because, we hear where elective surgeries have been called off so that the hospitals can have the beds and the facilities to work with these folks. But of course, that doesn't apply here. What about somebody that has a cancer diagnosis? Are they still undergoing treatments? And obviously
yes.
They have to be, right?
I specifically can't speak to that. We know that will be an issue. Some things. So what the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network does is we specifically are advocating for legislation, making sure that there's the most access to care possible. So, we've been working on things like telehealth, making sure that, if there's the ability to do telehealth opportunities, that's there. Access to affordable care. So the most recent stimulus package that was passed, we, ACS CAN, supported, providing free testing for COVID-19, making sure that people had full access to the family and medical leave, increased funding for Medicaid. That's going to be more important than ever right now. For anyone that's unable to work, we want to make sure that they have health care and can be able to, get access. In relation to, will cancer treatments be postponed? That is more of like a personal decision between a doctor and their patient. I can't speak to the broad picture of that, but that is, something we want to worry about, and making sure that everyone does social distance so that those who are most vulnerable are able to feel safe in their environment and then they don't feel at risk when they're outside.
I got to give a shout out to a guest that was just on the podcast, Morgan Newman. God love Morgan. She's a cervical cancer survivor. And she's a survivor, but Morgan's not well. And as she pointed out on the interview on the podcast, she's never going to be well. Some of these things are issues that she's going to have to deal with her entire life. And my God, her bravery in the face of that is unbelievable. But again, it brings me back to these weakened immune systems that folks have. Now, I know you're not a doctor, but isn't that one of the side effects or one of the problems with chemotherapy, as an example? Doesn't that weaken your immune system?
Yeah, most definitely. We are very, very concerned. These cancer patients, their bodies go through a lot. Whatever their treatment may be, chemo or radiation, their bodies are definitely weakened from those treatments. And so being able to protect them with social distancing and, I've been in contact with some of our volunteers. I've had a conversation with one that they were, between them and their doctor, they were deciding, is it okay to postpone treatment? Being in those environments where COVID-19 might be around. I know that the hospitals are doing that the best that they can. And we have to trust that they're going to make the right decision. The most things that we can do is, continue to push for more access to care, making sure that no one's going to be kicked off their health care or can't afford their treatment in a time like this. That's one of the big things that we're really concerned about.
You talk about the health care and the health insurance and all that, and I don't want to put you on the spot. I just thought maybe you would know this. Has the American Cancer Society taken a position on Medicare for All, as an example? Do you know?
So we don't take a position on those things. We're an evidence-based organization. So whatever is being presented, at Congress or whatever, we do the research. We make sure that, if that policy has been presented to Congress, that we do our research. We make sure that, will this have a full access to care? So we do that nationally, and we also do that in the state. So I'm working with the state legislature to make sure that, like this past year in Iowa, we were making sure that every person in Iowa was able to have access to Medicaid. There was some bill that was going through the Senate that we opposed. It was require anyone to be on Medicaid, that they would have to prove that they are working. It's a work requirements bill. We find fault with that because, if you're a caregiver or if you're going through treatment, your work might not be consistent. And going through all that extra paperwork is not what we need. I mean, especially when it comes to unprecedented times like this. So we were really trying to make sure that bill was killed. We're still working on that. That's something we're going to always continue to work on. And then also with that, it doesn't, we want to make sure that everyone has access to preventative care. So, if you're not able to work, that will mean that you aren't able to go and get screening for cervical cancer, which we found was so important to Morgan, who has been an incredible volunteer for for ACS CAN. We are so blessed to have her. I know that you were able to speak with her a little bit ago.
Yeah, God love Morgan. I mean, she's the greatest. Well, okay, so let's talk about, and again, going back to my experience with Above and Beyond Cancer, you've got physical health, which we've talked about, and the at-risk patients as far as that's concerned. But a big part of this is mental health. I mean, that's a big part of Above and Beyond Cancer, helping these folks cope, but also have this positive attitude that will get them through this cancer issue that they're dealing with. And the community has a big part to do with that. That's what the meetings are like every Wednesday night that I do the podcast. They do trips all around the world. I mean, just check out aboveandbeyondcancer.org, folks, and you'll see what I'm talking about. I mean, they get it, and there's scientific evidence. It's a fact. I mean, that plays a big part in all of this. Well, okay. fast forward a little bit to COVID-19, like you're talking about, Jackie, and these folks are like everyone, and maybe they need to be more than anyone. They're self-quarantine. They're shut in. It might be just them, for God's sake. It might be them and just a spouse, which that can get old for anybody. Let me tell you. Well, you mentioned telemedicine. Well, what about helping folks with the mental side of this, with the positive thinking part of it? I mean, they can't go to yoga. They can't go to their meetings. They can't go, can that be dealt with on a telemedicine basis?
So, well, one shout out to Dr. Deming. He is the one who has founded Above and Beyond Cancer, and he was actually former board president or former board chair for ACS Can. So we are so thankful to have him. He is just
great.
such an incredible resource for us, for the cancer community in Des Moines, in the state. So we're so thankful to have him. But when it comes to those sort of things, I have noticed that so for ACS Can in specific, our biggest factor and thing we care about is we want to make sure that everyone's safe. So we've been working from home for the past week or so, maybe more, and we have actually gone as far as to cancel all of our events, all of our in-person events. And I feel like we are doing the best that we can to come up with unique ways to virtually interact with each other. I feel like that's one of the biggest things we're going to have to do moving forward, is that we have to create constant communication. So I've been reaching out to our volunteers. Part of my job is just, creating this community and making sure that everyone feels connected. So I've been reaching out to our volunteers, making sure that everyone is feeling safe. If they're not, is there anything that we can do? I feel like this is such a good time to come together and rally together, especially those in smaller communities. One of our volunteers lives in a very small community, and I reached out and I asked, are you doing okay? And they're worried. They're nervous. Their grocery stores are, understaffed and running out of supplies. And, it's whatever we can do to make sure that they're feeling, supported. And that's one of the great things about the cancer community, is that everyone really does step up when times get hard.
Yeah. And to survive, you need to not be negative, obviously, which has kind of been the focus in the past, but you also need to not be fearful. And if this is a virtual thing, Podcast by George is here. Come on, folks, join in. I mean, watch us, like us, comment. If you want to be on the podcast, let me know. I'll put you on there. But in the meantime, we've got folks like Jackie Kale to share her thoughts and wisdom when it comes to this. And you can't see this because of the microphone, but I want to show my T-shirt here. So you see that? So
I love it.
Yeah. So I'm a hockey guy, and a friend of mine, his son was stricken with childhood cancer, which the child was able to survive, thankfully. But they were selling these T-shirts at the hockey rink during a hockey game, actually, and I bought one. And you'd be surprised how often I get to bust it out, because cancer is such a prevalent thing in everyone's life here in America. Well, Jackie, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast and answering my questions. Is there anything that you wanted to say here in closing, or maybe something that I didn't ask about that you wanted to comment on?
I would just say that, I do think that everyone's impacted by cancer, and that we all do have a part to make sure that these survivors, patients, caregivers are protected. We don't want to lose anyone from cancer. We have a long way to go, but we've made such huge strides. And I do think that, one of the biggest things that you can do is advocate. Speaking with your local legislatures, I know that'll be really important coming up here at the session was postponed because of the virus. Coming up, it'll be more important than ever to advocate for those funds that do go to cancer research in the state, that do go to cancer screenings, those are protected. Those are life-saving measures that we need to do our best to protect. And the best way to do that is advocating in your local communities, advocating at your state house, state senate, your Congress. It's all so important and goes such a long way.
I mean, that's great. That's a great way to close, Jackie, because the point of the matter is, I mean, you can't go down to the State House right now, but email still works, folks. They're still delivering the mail. The post office is still up and running. You can still write letters. You can still email. You can still voicemail. Yeah, exactly. And all of those things have an impact. It's a major way to get the attention that these issues so desperately need. So that's great, and I'm glad to play just a small role in this and to be able to help out a little bit. Jackie, thanks again for being on the podcast.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
That's Jackie Kale, folks. She's a grassroots manager for the American Cancer Society, the Cancer Action Network. And that's going to do it. We're going to wrap it up. Check us out, like I said, on Twitter. We're on YouTube. We're on Spotify and iTunes and, of course, YouTube, where you can see all the videos, and www.podcastbygeorge. But right now, that's it. That's all there is. There ain't no more. Not today. That's another podcast by George.